I want you to imagine that you've never seen a tiger. And I told you, as someone who you trusted, that there was such a creature as a tiger that was very great and very powerful and very dangerous. And you were to say, well, show me this tiger. Show me what it looks like. And I were to show you a picture, a photograph of a tiger, zoomed in very close to the tiger, showing only the orange stripe. And I said, here is a tiger. I would be telling you the truth, in one sense, that I did indeed show you a picture of a tiger, but the reality is at that point you would not know what a tiger actually looks like. Then I want you to imagine that at some point down the road, someone else showed you an entire picture of a tiger, where you started to notice that instead of just the orange part that I showed you, that tigers also have black stripes, they have a white underbelly, they have claws, they have sharp teeth, they have eyes, they have a vast complexity that makes up a tiger. At that point, you would lose a little bit of trust in me. You wouldn't maybe see me as a truthful storyteller. And then you were to call me a liar. I might come back and say, well, no, I didn't lie. You asked me to show you a picture of a tiger, and I showed you a picture of a tiger. This illustration, for me, is a metaphor for how many of us gather information about the world. Most of us get our information from news articles. These news articles, because of their very nature, their limitation of bandwidth, you might say, news articles can only show us a small picture of what's going on. We are living in a world right now where that is more dangerous than it has ever been. A populace that does not understand what's going on, and even worse, they think they do. My view on getting information from media has always been one that's a little bit nuanced. We live in a world right now where we are so highly polarized and drawn down the middle in terms of sides. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit deeper into my personal outlook than I have ever gone on this show. The stakes of this time right now are so high that I feel strongly that I should. I have an allergic reaction to political sides. I think they are very harmful, and I think they cause everyone who allows themselves to participate in tribal thinking to have very large blind spots. One of the reasons that happens is because when you have a point of view that you tend to attach to other people that you perceive as being on your side, that adds another filter to what is already a very difficult thing for humans to do, which is to understand the world around us. Now we've got the added filter of learning new information and having to look around you to other people to see if the people you like also see it that way as well. And the pressure there is tremendous to then see it the same way that the people on your side see it. At that point, we're talking about confirmation bias at its absolute strongest. So for me, one of the things I do is I first recognize that I am not immune to this either. I have risk of confirmation bias and not looking at things clearly, and I acknowledge that about myself. But what I then try to do is try to remove as many possible filters that might cause that bias as I possibly can. And in my opinion, one of the biggest ones that get us, one of the biggest filters that can sometimes get us, is this political tribalism thing. So I know a lot of times people say that they don't have a side politically, and you don't probably know me well enough to know if I'm just saying that to impress you or whatever. But if you were to have a conversation with me in real life, or maybe even those of you who listen to this show, you probably have already figured out that this is true. I don't have one. I really don't have an axe to grind. I don't have an agenda other than trying to figure out what is true about the world. And so with the analogy of the tiger, which I might be coming back to later, plays into of how we perceive the media, right? Well, one of the things that is very unfortunate right now is we've got a side, let's call them the red hat wearers, that like to cry out something called fake news. The media is a hoax, right? They are lying. They're telling us things that are not true. They're making up stuff. But then, of course, all it takes is a few little observations to realize that most of the stuff the news media tells us is true. But like in my tiger analogy, they are limited in how deeply and how broadly they can explain what is true. So they are showing us true things, zoomed in so closely that most people don't understand what is really being told to them. So then we have this misunderstanding that's going on of true information that's being presented. But because people take that information in such small doses and misunderstand it, it then gets construed into other things that are not true. So then, of course, somebody comes across information that contradicts or seems to contradict what they saw on the news channel, and then immediately, if you're not a deep thinker, you cry fake news, right? So it's created this whole thing. So on the flip side of that, there's also a culture of people who have been conditioned to believe that if the news and the major news media didn't tell me it's true, then it's probably not true, because if it were important, they'd be telling me. But again, they can't tell you everything. So one of the interesting things about this pandemic for me, because I have this outlook of that the news isn't going to tell me what's fake things, they're going to tell me small parts of the real things. And then it is my job as an informed citizen, because I believe that a democracy and a republic like ours requires informed citizenry in order to operate. I rely on the news, or I relied early in March on the news to tell me there was a pandemic coming. Okay? And so what I knew immediately to do at that point, based on past training, that for me goes all the way back to 9/11, which was when I first figured this out, my training that I have put myself through was to immediately at that point, when I knew something big was happening in early March, tell myself, my family, to turn off the news. Turn off the news. We're not going to watch the news. We're going to go directly to people who are experts in pandemics to understand how to process the information that we're coming across. And of course, on social media, we're getting the clips all the time of the news anyway. I knew I'd see it. The purpose of that was not because I thought the news was going to tell me something that wasn't true, but that I was going to be in danger of focusing only on the narrow aspect of this really important news story that those other humans, which run the news stations, are focused on. Everybody's got a thing that they're going to be really focused on. Now, of course, news media tends to focus, as their natural bias, on the thing that is going to scare me the most, because that's how they make their money. They know that if they present something that is really dramatic, then I will tune in and watch. So, and that's, of course, that's been true for a long time. That's not something that is controversial to even say, in my opinion. News media, if it bleeds, it leads. That doesn't mean they're lying. That means that's their business model. So when I said turn off the news, it was because I didn't want to put myself, my own mind, in danger of becoming too hyper-focused on the narrow aspects that were being presented there. We're going to go directly to people who are experts in pandemics to understand how to process the information that we're coming across. And of course, on social media, we're getting the clips all the time of the news anyway. I knew I'd see it. I'm not going to be ignoring what's going on, but I want to train myself in that instance to create a frame of reference in my own mind that is as deep and broad as I possibly can about how epidemiologists, virologists, public health experts think and what types of things they look for and care about during something like this. So what I did was I began instantly ignoring tiny little clips of epidemiologists played on MSNBC or CNN and started going on podcasts and YouTube videos where full-length, hour-long plus lectures and conversations from those experts, like Dr. Adalja, who you saw on my show, like there were dozens of academic medical centers who put entire lecture series on epidemiology, and have since way before this happened, online, so that you, as a citizen, can not become an expert by any means, but so that you can have a frame of reference for understanding things about what happens during a pandemic. And that's what I started doing immediately. I also saw right away that by putting all these restrictions that we were starting to put on each other for businesses and for interactions, that this was going to have a huge impact on the economy. So I did the same thing there. I dove into economics and started reviewing, learn from professors in as many lecture series as I possibly can on what it means to have an economic crash, what it means to have an economic recovery, what it means, where the value of our money comes from. In fact, my first text message on economics worries was sent to a friend who I won't name on the show, but on March 13th, I became immediately concerned about starvation in the third world. That was the day that I first heard discussion of mandatory shutdowns happening, was on March 13th, and my immediate thought was people will starve to death as a result of this. Most people don't understand how interconnected our society is and how our economy is. There are millions of people whose daily bread, quite literally, is dependent upon access to markets in the developed world. And if those markets turn off like a light switch, we sit here in the US with a relatively large economic cushion. We can shut down our jobs and have the US as the world's reserve currency, which can be diluted and printed for a little while to get us by, and we had all these stimulus checks coming. Other places don't have that. They shut off their livelihoods because we shut off our livelihoods. 2 weeks later, the BBC runs the first story of hunger riots in India. A month later, the UN publishes that they estimate that 135 million extra people this year will face acute food shortages. This is what you do if you're an informed citizen. You worry about all of the aspects of this. But what did we see on social media? We saw hyper-focus on one thing. Right? So I started thinking about all these things. And then I started thinking, I've got family members who have severe anxiety disorders that I love very much. And I know that for them, one of the worst things that you can do to them because of their disorder is isolate them. And then I started thinking, well, that applies to a lot of people. And it applies to a lot of people that I love. I became, again, this is early March, extremely worried about how stay-at-home rules and social distancing rules might apply to those people who are triggered by isolation, and how that tends to spiral into feelings of despair, not being able to socialize, not being able to bounce ideas off of other people and feel safe. So I started trying to educate myself about that. As a result, I immediately began to start to see on social media the divides that were coming in amongst my friends, many of whom are political partisans. Because most people are, right? And I started to notice how strange it was in early March that we would divide as a country on how to handle a viral pandemic based on what party you voted for before the pandemic. That was really strange to me. I'd never seen anything like it before. I've seen us divide along party lines for 20 years on other things, but I thought for sure something like this, we would see mixtures of people believing different things and reading different scientists and bouncing ideas off of each other. But instead what I saw was people shaming each other for questioning what one scientist said by pointing to another scientist who said something else. And I immediately thought that was very strange, because that's what science is. Especially when something is brand new and research is happening for the very first time, you're going to get, in a normal functioning scientific community, groups of scientists who say one thing, and then groups of scientists who say, no, but you forgot to look at this. This is normal. And I started seeing people saying things like, trust the experts. My favorite, trust the science, which I find to be mind-boggling. If you feel the need to put the before the word science, it indicates to me that you think of science as a singular set of indisputable things that cannot be understood by mere mortals. That's what I'm starting to gather from the term the science. and then immediately not raising the question of which experts should we trust. Now for this, I turn to the same logic that I used in the tiger analogy at the beginning of the episode. I trust a little bit from every expert, but I also realize that no one person knows everything, as I've talked about a lot on this show. So I'm not going to give any one scientist the carte blanche to just decide based on their narrow view of the world. And even though they are well trained and their narrow view is trained on the subject, they still are human and they are fallible and they are subject to confirmation bias and tunnel vision. They're going to look at the thing that they are interested in studying, maybe the one that's their expertise. They're going to have access to a slice of the truth. Okay? But I'm also going to then factor in, when I'm deciding what to believe and what to trust, is I'm also going to factor in that all humans have this other thing, which is called incentive. Everybody's got certain incentives that motivate and kind of shape what that tunnel that their vision goes through is. We all have incentives, right? From us, many of us in the choral world, our incentive is figuring out how to keep our jobs, which is really important. And I'm aware of that as one of my possible sources of bias in being willing to look at this whole picture, right? Because somebody presented to us a part of the picture that was basically you have to not do your job the way you're used to. All right, well, I'm going to look around for other parts of that picture because that seems very, very narrow to me. So the same thing applies to scientists. They all have that aspect because they're all human as well. So for example, if you are a public health official, you are a scientist who works for the government. To me, that's an important thing and we need really good people to do that. But they don't then, in my mind, have any access to mystical information that the scientist, for example, who works at an academic medical center might not have. There are different incentives at play. For a government scientist, they have to justify their job by looking like they are protecting the public. That's an incentive that can change how you perceive things. Then you're going to be, of course, more biased towards government solutions because you work for a government. If you're working for an academic medical center, you might have different types of bias where your job is to essentially get it right so that you don't get fired, right? So I personally put a little bit more trust in academic medical centers for the cutting edge when it comes to science because they do lose quite a bit of respect within the community when they get it wrong. Okay, so there's that. But then there's also independent research firms around the world that do work. None of them have access to the exact correct answer. And so to say trust the science, to say trust the experts, to me is something that an uninformed citizen would allow themselves to do if trust the expert means choose the one type of expert you like the best and ignore all the rest. And that's what I think we did. As a society, we all chose our favorite kind of scientist. And we decided that's what trust the experts mean. And I think it's starting to change. I think we're starting to get the message out there that, well, like I'm describing, is that we have to zoom out. We have to understand that little bits of the truth will be held and discovered through this process by lots and lots of different people. And that's okay. That's good. We've got to let the scientific process happen. Trust the scientific process. And so, of course, I did what an informed citizen does. I listened to both. I read both. But of course, what I did first, back in early March, went through hours. I probably did about 10 to 12 hours in like 2 days when I was in Key West. Because I was there at my dad's house on vacation. And I was just absorbing through podcasts while running, while exercising, while sitting by the pool, and understanding how the process of study during something like this happens. And one of the things I learned right away is that they will not know how dangerous or deadly a virus is. Strange. So this little background today is to simply help you understand where I've been coming from as I have challenged our assumptions and I have challenged our desire to have a solid, concrete answer on what is going on right now in the world. Right now. We've wanted it since the very beginning. We wanted a concrete answer in March. We wanted a concrete answer in April. We still want one right now. And guys, it's not going to happen yet. There is lots and lots of stuff that's being learned every day. That's normal. And the scientists, by the way, even really good ones, top-notch, professional, well-respected scientists will disagree. And they're going to fight like the dickens until they have aggregated enough data to come to some kind of a consensus, but that takes time. So what I would encourage you to do is stay tuned. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you have any concerns about what we are doing here on the show. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. This is not a science show, and I am not a scientist. But I am trying to be as informed as I possibly can. And my agenda is to figure out what's true and shed as many things as I possibly can that might prevent me from seeing that. And I would encourage you to join me in that. So sorry for the super meta episode there. I've been needing to get that off my chest for a while. I am encouraged by the increase in conversation in our community that includes nuance and truly seeking what is true, shedding some prior assumptions, starting to see more and more of that. And so just wanting to have this conversation increase, broaden, deepen, and that is what this show is all about. So thank you so much for listening, and feel free to share this episode. Join over at the Patreon. We're having some awesome behind-the-scenes help going on over there to make sure that this show can continue to operate. Patreon.com/Choralosophy. For as little as $3 a month, you can chip in over there and support and underwrite the costs of the show. Other things, of course, that are super helpful is joining the Choralosophers Facebook page, where we're discussing a lot of issues surrounding the show right now, and I'd love to see you over there. Thanks, everybody.